Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Boone. I'm a research manager on the Xbox Research and Design team, and I'm the research lead for accessibility across Xbox. Xbox Research and Design is a team of behavioral researchers and user experience designers. We center the user experience of players in our first-party games, franchises, and products. We work directly with all of Microsoft's gaming development teams to enable the magic of gaming for every person on the planet. Our team has got over 20 years of experiences centering ourselves around the user experience that we at Xbox want to give to our players. Inclusion is at the core of what we do at XR&D. Xbox's mission to reach every gamer on the planet to play, watch, communicate, and create together isn't just a set of words to us. We really do mean every person on the planet. And through our research, we've learned that players with disabilities constitute 20 to 30% of our gaming audience. Our research has uncovered that these gamers also hold a deep passion for and engagement with games and gaming, as well as the ingenuity to surmount the challenges that we as game developers often unintentionally present them with. Like everything we do at XR&D, our work on accessibility and inclusion is a team effort. I'm the research lead for accessibility, and Anna Waismeyer and Franklin Graham are the primary user researchers for accessibility on Xbox Research and Design. But we're not the only ones doing this work by any means. As I said, inclusion is at the core of what we do here, and we learned pretty early on that the best way for us to ensure our games and experiences are more inclusive is to get our whole team involved in the effort. In addition to the three of us, we have an Accessibility V team of researchers and designers across XR&D who dedicate their time to investigating accessibility and inclusion. And every researcher across our team has a pulse on and influences the accessibility and inclusion of the products that they work on. The three of us consider ourselves the nexus point for coordinating and directing accessibility research on our team. We work to enable and empower everyone within XR&D to center the voices and experiences of our players with disabilities across our entire ecosystem. And Anna is going to tell you a little bit about how we do that.
Hi. I'm Anna Waismeyer. And as Melissa mentioned, I'm one of the primary user researchers on the Xbox Research Accessibility team. Today, along with Melissa, I will be talking to you about some of the work that the Xbox Research Accessibility team has been up to. We will be covering two topics today. The first is going to be some learnings that we have about how to conduct games accessibility user research, from strategies on how to find players with disabilities, to invite to your research studies, to how to improve the accessibility of your research methods. The second topic we will be covering will be some of the top-line findings that we've collected from those research studies. Okay, so let's start with the first question I mentioned. How do you conduct research with players with disabilities? Honestly, pretty much the same way we do for anyone else. We're just careful to make sure that we provide any accommodations necessary to ensure that players participating in our studies have a good experience. The first thing we had to do to begin conducting this research was to figure out a good way of identifying players with disabilities to invite to our studies. To do this, we created a set of demographics questions, including a question about a respondent's disability status that could help us identify people with disabilities to reach out to and include in our studies. And another thing we did is we decided to ask these questions on all of our surveys and playtests, not just our accessibility study ones. This way we could be collecting information about disability status across all of our studies. However, we wouldn't be a user research team if we didn't pay attention to what our users are saying. We noticed that in our initial question that we had developed, we were getting a lot of other responses. This suggested that our response options were not adequately capturing the experiences of our respondents. So we invited feedback from members of our community to refine the question. In addition, we engaged in conversations with players with disabilities and discussed disability identity. We noted that some people don't identify as having disabilities. So for example, people with low vision who wear glasses, or people who are colorblind. And so we made sure to include language in our disability status question that aimed at a person's condition while avoiding as much labeling as possible. This also brought on a broader discussion about what we were looking for in participants in our studies. And what we landed on throughout these discussions, that asking a question about a person's disability status was really a way to get at their experiences. However, we were still concerned that a person might still select the I do not have a disability option, even if our products were not actually meeting their needs, and that we might miss out on including them in our research. So we developed another question set to help with this issue. We needed to have a way of getting at people's experiences in addition to their disability status. And so we created what we call a feature use question. It's still a work in progress, and this is just a subset of the questions that we ask within that entire feature use set. But it's been incredibly helpful for us in identifying people whose needs are not being met by our products. And having both the disability status question and the feature usage question has allowed us to better reach out to populations that will help us to continue to improve the accessibility of Xbox games and products. For example, these questions allow us to do research on features explicitly designed for a specific community, for example, blind or deaf players. Other times, we're actually looking to ensure that we've got a good feature experience, for example, subtitles, regardless of why a player is using it. So we want players who are deaf or hard of hearing to have a good experience. We want players who might be sound sensitive, and so needing to turn on subtitles and turn down their volume to also have a good experience. People with temporary situations that require the use of subtitles, things like that. And we want to be able to ensure that good experience as well. So now that we could identify people using both the disability status question and the feature usage question, we were ready to start doing some research, but we needed a much larger pool of people to get feedback from. So we started reaching out to the community. We reached out on social media, through community connections, and through our studio's connections to their players as well. Traditional user research methods often draw from a panel of participants who basically have accepted to receive communications about upcoming studies or different research events. But we wanted to do something a little bit different with this program. We started what we call the Accessibility Community Feedback Program. We're still growing this program and it's still very new, but one of the potential future directions we really want to take this in is to actually get our players more involved with us and to make it feel like more of a co-creation process. For now, the program gets invitations to studies across Xbox to try to ensure that everything we do is informed by feedback from the community. And because of this program, we have been able to push accessible design and planning out to more and more product teams at Xbox. Okay. So I've covered a little bit about how we identified people to ask to come in for studies, and some of the ways that we've been able to reach out through the community program to actually contact people about studies that we have ongoing. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're actually conducting research when people come in. We were able to do a little bit of this work in lab before COVID hit, and of course, since then, most of this has been remote through video conferencing or other kinds of research activities. So to get people into the lab, one of the first things that we have to do is actually ensure that they're able to sign what we call a participant waiver form or a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. And one of the things we decided to do was to actually start sending those ahead of time so that people would be able to use their own assistive technology to both read and sign the forms. It also just allows participants more time to read, understand, digest, and ask any questions that they might need to in advance of signing the form. Another thing we did is we started to pay attention to our font size and to whether things were screen reader compatible. In fact, we increased the font size and we added some FAQs just to make sure, or frequently asked questions sections to ensure that people were able to understand them better. And we also started to test both our study email templates and our screeners with screen readers to ensure that those were accessible as well. In the future, we're hoping to have both large print waiver versions and audio waiver versions to increase the accessibility and to ensure that we're getting as many players as possible into our studies. Another thing we've been doing to try to ensure the accessibility of our methods is to actually improve our accommodations request process. So we actually now put it on all of our screeners as a standard question, whether it's an accessibility study or not. And this allows us to ensure that research participation for all players is accessible and a good experience. We've also started to form partnerships with providers such as an ASL provider We provide them with jargon lists, and we're building relationships with specific interpreters with that provider to ensure, again, the best experience possible for the participants in our studies. In the future, we're hoping to be able to form partnerships with other accessibility providers, such as folks who provide accessible transportation to ensure that people are able to travel safely to and from our labs. Another thing we've been doing is testing the accessibility of our own research tools and looking to see, for example, if in our surveys, there's ways that we can improve the accessibility experience. So we've discovered things like low vision mode and trying to ensure that we limit ourselves to only question types that we know are accessible to screen readers and high contrast users and things like that. In fact, we're conducting our own usability testing with our surveys with people with disabilities. We figure, you can't test with the community, you can't test your products with the community if they can't get into and participate in your studies. So definitely one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that we have a constant feedback loop and that we're constantly improving the research methods, the accessibility of our research methods. Another thing we've been doing with our team is actually taking advantage of remote research. So one of the things we've been able to do is actually use the fact that we need to work remotely with all of our participants across Xbox. And we actually leverage that for trying to reach out to the accessibility community. And we pioneered some new methods that help to better integrate the community in our research and design process. So one of the things we've been doing is what we call community expert reviews. So rather than just a user researcher looking at unreleased content or a product, we're able to actually invite members of the community to also take part in that review and give us their expert thoughts from their own firsthand experiences. We've also been conducting something we call product experience surveys, in which a member of the community is able to experience a product, whether unreleased or already released, and answer survey questions about their experiences with that product. And then we're able to take that feedback back to the teams to get changes made or improvements made. And one of the huge benefits of this is that we actually get to have people at home using their own technology, using their own assistive devices where they are most comfortable. We know that coming into the lab can already be somewhat of an anxiety-provoking experience, and we really don't want to be limiting who we're bringing in to get feedback from. And so one of the advantages of remote research is that we're really able to reach out from as many players as possible from the community.
So now that we've talked about how we do research with players with disabilities, let's talk about what we've learned from our players. So first, you want to make sure that you just market the accessibility features that you do have in your game. It's not a good experience for anyone to pay money for your game, only to find out partway through that they can't play it or they can't progress any further in it. So help players know up front whether or not they can play your game. You can do this through detailing your accessibility settings, features, and options on an accessible website, like this Minecraft example here, including telling people how to find the settings and how to turn them on. Other ways that you can do this is through partnering with the community. There are many streamers, journalists, and reviewers with disabilities who would love to be able to communicate the information that you have about your accessibility features to their audiences. So partner with the community and provide review copies to these influencers so that they can communicate that information out to their audiences. Subtitles was one of the most widely asked for accessibility features. They help people with a variety of different kinds of disabilities, not only people who can't hear game audio, but also people who need the subtitles in order to make sense of the game's audio, dialogue, and narrative. So here are some best practices for good subtitles. 1, make sure that your font size is large enough. That is by far the most common piece of feedback that we got from our players, is that our subtitle font size is usually too small. Also, make sure that you're displaying the font against a high enough contrast background so that people can actually read and distinguish what the words are. And make sure that you're including any information that is already included in the game's audio dialogue, like speaker names, and also any emotional or contextual info, like the tone of voice that someone is using, or musical cues that maybe set the tone or emotion for a particular scene. Allowing allowing people to remap or change the controls in your game is also a really important accessibility feature. Full controller remapping is the gold standard here because that allows people to customize the control scheme exactly the way that they need it for either the way that they hold controllers or the type of input that they use. If for some reason you can't do full control remapping in your game, at least consider offering a variety of different default control schemes for different play styles. Also, where possible, test your game or experience with different peripherals like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, quad sticks, and other peripherals and assistive technologies that players use. If you want to find out more about what kinds of inputs and peripherals players use in order to play your game, that's a perfect opportunity to actually ask players with disabilities what different inputs they're using for your games and then use those in the testing. In addition to allowing players to remap controls, it's also important to allow players to adjust the sensitivity and the precision of the controls and assists in your game. Some players will be able to move mouse or thumbstick or other inputs within a very narrow window of movement, whereas others will need a much wider range of movement in order to play. So allow for both high and low precision when you're allowing people to adjust the precisions of their assists and also the sensitivity of any controls. Every player is unique, and disabilities can express themselves in many different diverse ways. No two disabilities look exactly the same. So that's why customization is really key. Try to include as many settings, options, and toggles in your game as possible, and make those settings easy to find and turn on and off. One example is from one of our recent games, Grounded, which has an arachnophobia mode. And that allows people to adjust the spiderness of the spiders that appear in the game. So you can, for example, have a spider without any legs that looks less like a spider and is maybe a little less threatening or anxiety provoking than having a full spider rendered in the game. This can throw a lot of information at people. But one of the things that you want to do is make sure that when you do give that information, you express it through multiple sensory channels. So for example, if you have visual output, you'll want to include audio cues and vice versa. This allows people who might not be able to take in information through one output to take it in through a different one so that they still have the same information and are able to progress through the game. So for example, in Gears 5, you can hear where gunshots are coming from, but you can also see where they're coming from through a flash of light that shows both the direction and at what level it's being aimed at you. Another example of this is that it's important to allow the UI in your game to be narrated. If you have menus like inventory screens or different ways that people can select things, allow that UI to be narrated so that people who cannot see that information can also play your game. Also, where possible, incorporate haptic feedback as another way to give information to players. Of course, you want to allow it to be able to be turned on and off, but having multiple different ways that people can take in the information only enhances their ability to play your game. And when you're thinking about making your game accessible, don't forget to make multiplayer accessible too. We got a lot of feedback from our players with disabilities that they often face outsized levels of toxicity and harassment online because of the way that they choose to play or the assistive technologies that they use while they're playing. So try to offer accessible communications options like speech to text and text to speech that allow players with disabilities to communicate with any other player on the platform. You can also offer ways to protect players against toxicity, like allowing them to specify what assists or technologies that they use and allowing them to choose to play with other players to accept the way that they play. So one example is with Xbox's looking for group feature, where people can specify whether or not mic is optional. And that way, players with disabilities or any other player can find players who are fine with them not using voice chat. So here are some takeaways. Consult early and often directly with players with disabilities, and make sure that you're asking about players' needs rather than making assumptions. Again, players with disabilities are the experts on their own experiences, and when we talk to them, we can learn from how they already play games, the mismatches that already exist, and also learn more about what things we can do to delight them and make the experiences really good ones. Remember that accessibility requirements are a good start, but adhering to laws and standards alone does not ensure a good player experience. If we're really listening to our players and hearing about what their pain points are, but also their delighters, we can make sure that we're going beyond just requirements and thinking about what's going to make a really joyful experience for our players with disabilities. So thank you so much for listening to our talk, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.